We'd now like to move to our next speaker, which is Marlene Brito-Millán, the UCMex's fellow at the Universidad Autónoma de Guerrero in Mexico. Marlene, are you here?
Yes, I am. One moment.
Okay.
Can you all see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. All right, I'm going to try to time myself here. All right, well, thank you so much for letting me participate today. As you said, my name is Marlene Brito-Millán. I am actually trained in marine ecology and oceanography at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I'm currently a postdoc focused on coupled indigenous socio-environmental systems and environmental justice, with also applying decolonial feminist science methodologies. Today I'll be talking to you about the view from the other side, ocean grabbing, environmental justice, and the dignified resurgence towards decolonized autonomous life worlds. Okay, so I've divided this talk in three main parts, really trying to share a little bit of who or what is the other side. Then I wanted to get into deconstructing what ocean grabbing is, and finally end with autonomous life worlds and some very brief examples of what that is. So let's start with the other side. Within marine spatial planning as a field, I sense that it's set on protecting biodiversity and fisheries through implementation of protected areas and management. So common terms that we see here within a quick search of marine spatial planning and protected areas, you find terms that include enforcement, surveillance, no fishing reserves, compliance, etc. So part of what I want to do today is talk about who is it that's being kept from fishing? Who is it that we perceive as overfishing and needing enforcement? And whose bodies are the ones that we propose need to be surveilled? So this brings us to the other side. And so I would argue that we tend to think about the people and communities who in reality, whose way of life, cultural identity, and livelihood depend on their involvement in small-scale fishing and closely related activities. In both the global South and North, these communities and their traditional practices and cultures are threatened and confronted by powerful colonial and globalizing economic systems. I mean, there's no other way to say it, so I thought I'd just come right out and say it. And unfortunately, these are dramatically reshaping existing access rights and fisheries production models. Okay, so this brings us, now that we kind of have seen who is on the other side, right, to the definition of ocean grabbing, right, and what it is on this other side that how they perceive marine spatial planning is through this idea of ocean grabbing. So what is ocean grabbing? So it's the dispossession and exclusion of small-scale fishing communities from access to natural resources and markets upon which they have traditionally depended. Ocean grabbing tends to be anchored in market-based and corporate economic logic approaches to fisheries governance, nature conservation, and economic development. And ocean grabbing, in essence, is perceived as a global assault on small-scale fisher peoples and communities, especially of the global South. And so if we break down a bit more what ocean grabbing is, I decided to do this with a cartoon. And so if we start, in essence, with a small-scale local fishing community that is used to self-governing their communal-held ocean resources, ocean grabbing is MPAs, really marine protected areas, are perceived as a form of ocean grabbing. And what this does is it targets rich biodiverse hotspots, right, through tools like fish bans and restrictions for conservation purposes. And as Priscilla said earlier, without really considerations for the social dimensions and impacts. You also have state-sanctioned privatization as a form of ocean grabbing, which tends to grant concessions to powerful players. And so these concessions end up being used by different industries, including agro-industry, urban development, tourism development. You have hydropower projects, recreational parks, commercial aquaculture, ports, harbor, and landing sites. All of these, or some of these, have downstream effects on local aquatic and marine environments that include the input of nutrients and pollution. And then with ports, harbors, and landing sites, you also have the export, really, like the use of these are to export the majority of fish production, right? In the case of Vietnam, you see about 90% of fish production is exported outside of the country. It doesn't stay within local communities. Another form of ocean grabbing are the impacts of, again, export-oriented commercial industrial fishing. And so all of these forms can be categorized within what we call preemptive exclusion. And so what this is that it really captures resources from local fishers and the entire chain of people that depend on fishing. And this occurs, again, through, if it's not through direct occupation of space, then through the downstream consequences of nutrient input and pollution, which ends up destroying resources. And so we also have market-based approaches that like right-based fishing reforms, as you've heard and as Priscilla mentioned as well. Also, this includes ITQs, individual transfer quotas, right, where you have the allocation of defined shares of allowable catch to individual fishers or fishing companies. So these, in essence, also translate to a form of ocean grabbing from the perspective of folks, grassroots folks on the ground, that, as has already been mentioned, tend to have their own forms of governance and management of common pool resources, like the ocean. Now, what are some of the drivers behind some of these approaches? Is you have policymaking processes in the background, right, that are occurring within Congress, and which academia, conservation organizations, and philanthropy tend to be involved with, and have a voice within these institutions that tend to push these types of approaches and reforms based on the assumption, right, that ownership promotes stewardship. I'm talking specifically right now about the drive towards privatization, right, as a form of protecting oceans and common pool resources. Now, I would argue that, just as I mentioned, there tends to be, and as Eleanor Ostrom showed in her seminal work, there's a great diverse variety of methods, mechanisms, and systems within local communities that actually have been able to manage and sustain many of these resources for millennia. Now, I kind of wanted to branch out, zoom out, and talk about the final level here at a more intergovernmental, international level. You have intergovernmental programs, including things like Blue Growth Initiative, Blue Bond, the Blue Carbon Initiative, from various international United Nations institutions like the FAO, World Bank, UNESCO, partnering with Conservation International, IUCN. And so what you tend to see with these programs is that they're market-based approaches that dominate as part of the solutions. There tend to be top-down and one-size-fits-all. And the central actors, those at the table making the decisions of what the solutions will be, tend to be development agencies, private sectors, for example, the corporate seafood sector, what some folks have come to call the NGO industrial complex, philanthropists, example, Gordon Betty Moore Foundation or the Walton family. Other actors that should be central, I would argue, are social movements and fisher people, but that is not what we see within, again, these arenas in which many decisions are being made. And so ultimately, embedded within this whole I guess dynamics that we're describing here with ocean grabbing, all of that is really embedded within a system of racial capitalism. And so I'm going to describe it as a system whose basic principle, logic, and values are based on unlimited accumulation of capital via the commodification of natural resources, land, ocean, like land and ocean, and racialized bodies. And so this brings me to the final part, talking about really what is then an alternative to continuing to work within a system that is designed to basically have inequality based on racial hierarchies. And this is where we come to autonomous life worlds. What do I mean by autonomous? Esteban and Horta kind of described this as a radical strategy for realizing collective rights and self-determination in social and political organization that is rooted in communal structures. What is life worlds? The phenomenological concept is a dynamic cognitive horizon in which we live and which lives with us. So if we put that together, autonomous life worlds demand not only the right to survive, but to live well. And this is an example of that is as expressed in the Sumak Kasai and Sumak Kamanya of the Quechua Aymara Andean peoples. So it means to thrive and live well within the meaning of their own cosmogonies, their own identities, and own cultural imaginaries. So finally, just to, oh, there goes my timer. Just to wrap up, other elements of autonomous life worlds include really centering things like dignity. And so we see this through the example of a global anti-ocean gravity movement, which is the World Forum of Fishers Peoples that represents millions of fishers across the world to protect, defend, and strengthen the communities that depend on fisheries for their livelihood and food sovereignty, right? Again, sovereignty pointing that they do it in their way that is culturally appropriate for them. You have justice, as an important element of this. An example being the Pueblo of Purepecha in Cherán, Mexico, that took arms to defend themselves from a lot of the narco politics within their communities. I mean, they had it to basically seek justice in their situation. And then you have resurgence of traditional practices here, an example from Aboriginal salmon fishery in Canada, right, where you really get a resurgence of these socio-ecological relationships and ways of subsisting from the environment around you. And then we have decolonized life worlds. So the whole fact that we're talking about a framework of decolonization is extremely important to move towards one's own autonomous definition, again, of what the way I want to exist in this world means is tremendously important. And for this, I included the Quichua Pueblo in the Amazonian Ecuador. So I mentioned these as hopefully a starting point for all of you for those interested to continue to look into these concepts. Ultimately, these are all alternative ways of conceiving life and constructing other forms of inhabiting the world beyond the dominating colonial and racist economic modernity that has resulted in multiple crises for humanity. So with that, I want to thank you for listening and also invite you to another session in about 30 minutes where I, along with Siege, will further talk about other frameworks that fit into this. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marlene, for that really interesting. I mean, all the talks have been absolutely fascinating.